In 1866, a man named Benjamin Tyler Henry was fired from the company he had built, the company that manufactured the rifle bearing his name. The new owner renamed the company and erased Henry's name from the patent. That rifle became the Winchester. Henry received nothing. He died in poverty. That's number 8. We're starting at number 1. 25 weapons Union Army sharpshooters carried that history decided to bury. Between 1861 and 1865, the Union Army fielded 2 regiments of hand-picked marksmen who could hit a 10-inch target at 600 yards and live in a tree line for 3 days without moving. Hiram Burden built them. He called them the United States Sharpshooters, 1st and 2nd Regiments. They changed how infantry combat worked. But the weapons they carried were not the standard issue Springfield musket in every museum photograph. They carried custom rifled barrels, experimental repeaters, captured Confederate hardware, and improvised field tools the Ordnance Department never formally acknowledged, because acknowledging them meant explaining why adoption had been delayed for years. After the war, equipment requisitions disappeared. Inventors went bankrupt. Battlefield reports were redacted. And 25 weapons carried by the deadliest marksmen in American military history quietly dropped out of the record. We're bringing them back. I've organized these by stakes, starting with the most familiar and working toward the most suppressed. By the time we reach number 25, you'll understand why one American inventor's name appears on cartridges manufactured in 30 countries today, while the man himself died in a rented room with $42 to his name. Number 1, the Sharps Model 1859 rifle. You've probably seen this one, the single-shot, breech-loading rifle in every sharpshooter photograph. That's the version history remembers. But here's what almost nobody knows. The rifles Burden's men actually carried had custom double-set triggers the Army refused to purchase, meaning sharpshooters paid for the upgrade themselves out of their own $11 monthly wage. The guns also required hand-fitted ammunition. Standard military loads failed at long range. By 1874, the Sharps Rifle Manufacturing Company had gone bankrupt. War Department contracts routed exclusively to Springfield. And the original tooling was auctioned for scrap. One more thing the Sharps made possible. And number 2 made it 3 times deadlier at distance. Number 2. The Davidson telescopic sight. Most people think sniper scopes began in World War II. What history class never told you is that Davidson and Company of London was selling telescopic sights to American sharpshooters by 1862. Through private purchase, because the Ordnance Department refused to requisition them. A mounted Davidson extended effective range to roughly 1,000 yards in good light. By 1868, the company had dissolved. Its patents absorbed into British military optical contracts, and the American sharpshooter records listing these sites quietly removed from official inventories. Number 3 goes back further, to a single workshop in upstate New York that built the most accurate rifle barrel in North America. Number 3, the Morgan James rifled barrel. Most people assume Burden's sharpshooters all carried identical government-issue weapons. The version you've heard is the cover story. Morgan James of Utica, New York, was one of the most respected target rifle makers in the country, and a number of sharpshooters arrived at enlistment carrying James-barreled rifles from civilian competition shooting. Match-grade barrels, fitted individually, accurate at distances the standard Sharps could not touch. The Army never purchased them. When procurement was standardized in 1863, craft barrel makers like Morgan James lost their contracts, and the tradition of individually fitted precision rifles died in Army service within 2 years. Number 4 is where things begin to get strange, and the name James Ripley starts to matter. Number 4. The Spencer repeating carbine, 7 rounds without reloading. Lever action, rimfire, patented 1860. Christopher Spencer walked into the White House in August 1863 and personally demonstrated this rifle to Abraham Lincoln on the South Lawn. Lincoln test-fired it himself, called it a fine arm, and here's the part that gets buried. General James Ripley, Chief of Ordnance, had been blocking the Spencer for 2 full years before that demonstration. His stated reason was ammunition waste. 2 years, 32,000 dead at Antietam alone. Lincoln overrode Ripley personally. Ripley was removed from his position 4 months later. Number 5 is the repeating rifle that didn't survive, and the reason is written in scorched metal. Number 5. The Colt Model 1855 revolving rifle, 5 shots, a rotating cylinder. The same mechanism as the Colt revolver, scaled to rifle format. There's a reason this stopped being issued to infantry by 1862. The gap between cylinder and barrel, fine in a pistol held at arm's length, became catastrophically dangerous when shoulder-fired. Hot gas and lead fragments could exit sideways directly into the shooter's left hand. Soldiers called it chain fire. Multiple battlefield reports describe burns and lost fingers. The Army withdrew the Colt revolving rifle from field service in 1862 and struck the incident reports from summary documents. The rifle worked for exactly 1 year and then vanished from every official account. Number 6 gave sharpshooters carbine firepower in something small enough to conceal under a coat. And that is exactly why the Army could not officially acknowledge it. Number 6, the shoulder stock Colt revolver. Colt manufactured a detachable wooden shoulder piece for the Model 1851 and 1860 revolvers, converting a standard handgun into a short carbine effective to 150 yards. You're going to want to hear this part. The Army's own test boards rated the shoulder stock Colt and recommended it for cavalry and sharpshooter use in 1861. The War Department rejected the recommendation under Army Regulation 1862, which prohibited hybrid weapons on grounds of logistical inconsistency. What that phrase meant in practice: the Army refused to account for non-standard weapons in requisition forms. Sharpshooters who carried them sourced their own ammunition and replacement parts. In the field in 1863. Number 7 is a rifle that nearly outlasted all of them, and then got bought out. Number 7. The Ballard Falling Block Rifle, designed by Charles H. Ballard of Worcester, Massachusetts, manufactured by Ball and Williams, beginning 1861. Single shot, falling block action, exceptionally accurate with target-grade loads. But here's what almost nobody knows. The Ballard was considered by several sharpshooter companies to be more accurate than the Sharps at distances over 400 yards, and at least 3 documented requisitions were filed requesting Ballard adoption in 1862. All 3 were denied. The War Department's stated reason: the Sharps contract was already signed. By 1875, the Ballard's patents had been acquired by Marlin Firearms, production shifted to sporting rifles, and the wartime history of the Ballard as a precision military weapon ceased to appear in any record. Number 8 is the rifle I mentioned in the opening, the one whose inventor was fired from his own company. Number 8, the Henry rifle. 16 rounds without reloading, lever-action magazine tube, 44 caliber rimfire. Confederate soldiers called it the rifle you could load on Sunday and shoot all week. What history class never told you is what happened to the man who built it. Benjamin Tyler Henry designed this rifle, held the patent, supervised production at the New Haven Arms Company factory. In 1866, Oliver Winchester reorganized the firm as the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Fired Henry, acquired his patents, and replaced Henry's name with his own. Henry filed a lawsuit. He lost. He collected no royalties. He died in 1898 with almost nothing. 32 years after Winchester put his own name on the weapon Henry had built from the ground up. The rifle is called the Winchester today. Benjamin Tyler Henry's name was erased so thoroughly that most Americans have never heard it. Number 9 was invented by a dentist, and the Army's response tells you everything about how they treated people who were trying to help them win. Number 9, the Maynard Tape Primer Carbine. Edward Maynard was a Washington dentist who spent 20 years developing a tape primer system. A roll of paper caps that automatically advanced the next percussion primer on each hammer strike. The carbine built around this system was one of the fastest loading military rifles of the era. The version you've heard is the tape primer. The cover story ends there. Maynard refused to sign an exclusivity agreement with the War Department in 1862. He wanted to retain civilian licensing rights. The Ordnance Bureau responded by routing contracts to competing designs. Maynard carbines already delivered to field units were reclassified as non-standard, and replacement parts were systematically denied. The weapons worked. The politics killed them. Number 10 is a weapon that appears in no official inventory because technically it was not a weapon. Number 10, the field shooting rest, what sharpshooters called a spider. A forked stick or purpose-built iron bracket planted in the ground at firing position. Without one, even the steadiest hand loses consistency past 400 yards. Burden's men used improvised and purpose-made rests throughout the war. And here's the part that gets buried. When the War Department conducted post-war equipment assessments, field-adapted tools like the shooting rests were systematically excluded from official records. If it was not purchased through standard procurement, it did not officially exist. Thousands of iron spiders and whittled fork rests carried into the wilderness and Cold Harbor were removed from battlefield documentation entirely. Number 11 came directly from the enemy, captured at gunpoint and used for the rest of the war. Number 11, the Whitworth rifle. British-made .45 caliber hexagonal bore the most accurate long-range rifle of the Civil War era. There's a reason this stopped being discussed in Union histories. The Whitworth was the Confederate sharpshooter's primary long-range weapon, imported from Manchester, England, at roughly $500 each. The British government's unofficial embargo on rifle exports to the Union made direct purchase impossible. But Union sharpshooters acquired Whitworths anyway through battlefield capture. When a Confederate sharpshooter was killed or overrun, his rifle came with the position. The Union records listing these captured weapons were removed from inventory accounting, probably because acknowledging them meant explaining exactly how they were obtained. Number 12 was also born from a buyout, just a quieter one, the volcanic repeating pistol. Lever action, magazine fed, firing a self-contained rocket ball cartridge. Made by the Volcanic Repeating Arms Company, founded 1855 by two names you know, Horace Smith and Daniel Wesson. Before Smith and Wesson made revolvers, they built the Volcanic. You're going to want to hear this. the lever-action pistol that became the direct mechanical ancestor of the Henry rifle, and by extension, the Winchester, through a single acquisition chain. The Volcanic Arms Company was dissolved in 1857. Oliver Winchester bought the assets and reorganized them as the New Haven Arms Company, the same firm that later fired Benjamin Tyler Henry and became Winchester Repeating Arms. Volcanic to Henry to Winchester, each name erased by the next. Number 13 is so obscure it appears in almost no accounts borrowed directly from competitive target shooting. The competition globe front sight. A cylindrical housing mounted at the muzzle with an interchangeable insert. An aperture or bead positioned at the center of a dark tunnel, used by target shooters since the 1840s. But here's what almost nobody knows. Several of Burden's original recruits were civilian competition shooters who arrived at enlistment with precision-fitted personal rifles, some with globe sights already mounted. The Army never issued them, never purchased them. When post-war equipment surveys were conducted, any non-issue sight in a soldier's personal equipment record was crossed out as unauthorized modification. The precision sight technology that may have produced some of the longest-range kills of the war does not appear in a single official record. Number 14 is a weapon most military historians refuse to classify as military hardware. Number 14, the D-guard Bowie knife, a large blade, 12 to 15 inches, with a D-shaped iron guard protecting the hand. Most Americans associate this with the Confederacy. What history class never told you is that Union sharpshooters operating behind Confederate lines as scouts and pickets carried D-guard Bowies in significant numbers, purchased privately, never issued. The Army's official records classify sharpshooters as riflemen. No bladed weapons in standard equipment lists, but at least a dozen post-war pension depositions describe close-quarters encounters where sharpshooters used blades. After the war, Reconstruction-era laws in several states banned large-edged weapons, and the entire category of military Bowie knife usage quietly left the historical record. Number 15 was rejected by the Army 3 times before it turned up in the personal kit lists of half the regiment. Number 15, the dead shot aperture sight. A small metal disc with a precisely drilled hole replacing the standard open V-notch rear sight. Several American manufacturers produced these for target shooting from the 1850s onward. The version you've heard about is the open rear sight. The cover story ends there. The Ordnance Department refused to adopt aperture sights as standard issue on the grounds that they required operator skill unavailable in average infantry. Sharpshooters, specifically selected for shooting ability, were classified within the same procurement system as average infantry. Companies producing aperture sights lost contracts, several filed for bankruptcy by 1867, and the precision sight technology Burden's men used effectively throughout the war fell out of American rifle production for a generation. Number 16 involves a woman and a patent that was stolen before the ink dried. Number 16, the Costin Signal Flare Pistol, a handheld flare gun firing color-coded pyrotechnic rounds for field communication. Sharpshooters in advanced positions used them to signal main units across distances no voice could cover. And here's the part that gets buried. Martha Costin, a widowed mother of 4 in Philadelphia, spent 12 years and her personal savings developing this signal system from a rough sketch in her late husband's notebook. She traveled to Europe for pyrotechnic research, tested hundreds of formulations, and delivered a working system to the U.S. Navy in 1859. The Navy paid $40,000 for the rights, issued to the estate of Benjamin Franklin Costin, her dead husband, who had contributed only the original sketch. Martha, who had done 12 years of actual development work, received nothing, listed only as administratrix in the contract. Number 17 is where this video becomes something else entirely. Number 17. The Gardner Exploding Bullet. A .58 caliber lead projectile with a small percussion cap explosive charge embedded in the nose, designed to detonate on impact. There's a reason this stopped being discussed in polite military history. William Gardner patented the Gardner Exploding Bullet in 1862. By early 1863, it was being used by sharpshooters in the Western Theater. On April 24, 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed General Order No. 100, known as the Lieber Code, the first comprehensive codification of the laws of war in American history. Article 70 explicitly classified explosive and incendiary bullets as illegal under the laws of war, forbidden to be used against personnel. Union command ordered the weapons destroyed. Field reports mentioning their use were redacted in post-war record compilations. The men who carried them never appeared in official records. And the Gardner bullet, a documented American military invention used in an American war, was classified as a war crime and buried. Number 18. Greek fire incendiary shells. An incendiary compound, almost certainly phosphorus-based, packed into shell casings designed to ignite on contact. The Union Army did use incendiary projectiles during the war, primarily in siege operations. You're going to want to hear this. The same General Order No. 100 that banned exploding bullets contained language that military lawyers later used to suppress documentation of incendiary warfare at the individual soldier level. Large-scale siege operations made it into the histories, but the improvised incendiary rounds that individual sharpshooters carried in the field, those records were removed from War Department battle reports during post-war compilation between 1867 and 1880. Number 19 is the weapon nobody ever officially admitted existed, but every intelligence officer knew about. Number 19, the piano wire garrote, a length of high tensile wire with wooden handles at each end, used for silent close-quarters kills. Most people assume this is a World War II weapon, training manuals, behind-the-lines operatives. But here's what almost nobody knows. The Bureau of Military Information, the Union's wartime intelligence organization, established 1863, trained sharpshooters operating as scouts behind Confederate lines. Close-quarters silent tools were part of that training. The specific wire-based equipment is described in a single surviving document, a training memorandum from the Bureau's records collection, and then the collection effectively ends. A fire in the War Department building in November 1877 destroyed the Bureau's remaining files. Whether that fire was accidental is something no one has been able to prove either way. Number 20 is a weapon that was proposed, demonstrated, rejected, and then quietly used anyway. Number 20, the compressed air repeating rifle. Not science fiction, documented reality. The Girondoni air rifle had been a standard Austrian military weapon since 1780, capable of firing 22 lead balls without reloading, silently, with no muzzle flash. Lewis and Clark carried one on their 1804 expedition. What history class never told you is that by 1861, at least 2 American inventors submitted proposals to the Ordnance Department for updated compressed air military rifles. The Ordnance Bureau under General Ripley rejected both proposals without field testing. The inventor's patent applications lapsed by 1867 for non-payment of maintenance fees, standard procedure when a product finds no market. The technology that could have given Union sharpshooters a completely silent platform simply stopped existing in the American record. Number 21 never officially happened, which is exactly the point. Number 21. The wooden dummy decoy. A carved head and shoulders, sometimes with a uniform's jacket over a wooden frame, briefly raised above a parapet to draw enemy fire. When a Confederate sharpshooter fired at the decoy, the muzzle flash revealed his position. Union operators marked it on a sketch map and directed artillery onto the fixed point. The version you've heard is that both sides used field trickery. The cover story ends there. What was never documented officially is the systematic use of these decoys as a Union intelligence method. A structured process for mapping enemy sniper locations under combat conditions. Post-war battle reports excluded deception tactics entirely. The Army preferred a clean narrative of marksmanship. Decoys didn't fit the hero story, and the record was written accordingly. Number 22 was built by a civilian inventor who made $12,000 on a government contract and was bankrupt within a year of the war ending. Number 22. The Ketchum hand grenade. A cast-iron body with a wooden percussion cap nose plug and a cardboard fin tail for stabilization in flight. William F. Ketchum of Buffalo, New York, patented this design in 1861. The Union Army purchased approximately 90,000 units during the war. And here's the part that gets buried. Ketchum received no formal post-war commendation, no extended production contract, and no government acknowledgement of his contribution. The War Department Demilitarization Order of 1866 required destruction of surplus ordnance, including grenades, eliminating the physical record of how widely the Ketchum was deployed. Ketchum's factory closed that same year after Army contracts ended without notice or transition payment. The man who built the first mass-produced American hand grenade died without a military grave marker or a pension. Number 23 is where the cover-up becomes something harder to explain away. Number 23. The concealed Derringer pistol. Specifically, a Philadelphia Derringer, .41 caliber percussion hidden inside a false bottom ammunition box. A standard cartridge box for Sharp's .52 caliber ammunition had interior dimensions deep enough to conceal a Derringer below the paper cartridge tray. The sharpshooter walked as a rifleman. Behind the lines, he had a second weapon nobody knew about. There's a reason this stopped being documented. The Bureau of Military Information maintained records of scout equipment and tradecraft. When the 1877 War Department fire destroyed the Bureau's archives, documentation of concealed tools went with it. No official Union Army manual ever acknowledged using assassination-configured equipment. No post-war commission examined the question. The official record simply has no entry for this weapon, which is itself a kind of answer. Number 24 existed for exactly one reason: to make a sharpshooter invisible at 50 yards. Number 24. The sharpshooter's ambush suit. Burden's men wore dark green, the only Union regiment not in standard blue. In dense woodland terrain, a prone shooter against vegetation became nearly invisible at 50 yards. But the uniform was just the beginning. Individual sharpshooters in the Western theater improvised further, attaching cut vegetation, applying mud, weaving plant material into overcoats. At least 3 soldier memoirs from the 1st Regiment describe these field modifications. The Army never acknowledged field-modified camouflage as a formal practice. When Burden's sharpshooters were disbanded in 1865, the green uniform was discontinued. The regiment's modified field gear was categorized as private property, not government issue, and therefore excluded from all official archives. The first functional camouflage program in American military history exists nowhere in the official record, only in the memoirs of the men who wore it. Number 25 is the man who built all of this. And what happened to him afterward? Number 25, Hiram Burden's breech-loading diversion and the Burden primer. You know the name from the sharpshooter regiments. But here's what almost nobody knows about what happened after the war. In 1865, Burden patented a breech-loading conversion for the Springfield rifle, a retrofit that would have modernized millions of surplus muzzle loaders at minimal cost. The Ordnance Department rejected it and adopted a competing design at substantially higher per-unit cost. Burden sold his conversion patent to Russia, Spain, and several European governments. His second invention, the Burden primer, the small-arm cartridge primer that ignites the round from an anvil built into the case, is still in production today in 30 countries. The United States government never rewarded him with a royalty structure for either invention. Hiram Burden died in 1893 in a New York City apartment with $42 to his name. The man who built the deadliest sniper regiment in American history, whose primer still ignites cartridges fired in 36 countries, died broke and forgotten in the country he had served. Look at what just walked through. 25 weapons, different designs, different inventors, different categories of suppression, but run the dates. The Sharps Company bankruptcy, 1874. The Davidson Optics dissolution, 1868. The Bureau of Military Information fire, 1877. The Henry patent erasure, 1866. The Ketchum factory closing, 1866. Every suppression event in this list falls inside a single 15-year window, 1863 to 1878. And that window has a name. It is the period when the War Department, the Ordnance Bureau, and the post-war demilitarization orders systematically contracted American military technology back toward a single supplier ecosystem. Springfield Armory, the Colt patent structure, the emerging Winchester monopoly. Every innovative weapon on this list represented a procurement threat to one of those 3 structures. The Ballard threatened Springfield. The Henry threatened the status quo before Winchester absorbed it. The Spencer threatened the ammunition supply chains the Ordnance Bureau had already contracted for. Individual inventors, Ketchum, Maynard, Morgan James, Burden himself, had no lobby, no institutional backing, no veterans organization advocating for their patents. The War Department's post-war records compilation, conducted between 1867 and 1880, was not a neutral historical exercise. It was a document designed to explain to Congress why the war had cost what it cost. Anomalies, non-standard weapons, field modifications, captured hardware, prohibited munitions did not survive that process. The erasure of these 25 weapons was not an accident. It was a budget decision. A decision about what the official story of the Civil War would contain. The men who built these weapons and died using them were written out of that story not by historians, but by procurement officers. Some of these weapons, the ones that were never illegal, just undocumented, are still out there. The Burden primer is manufactured today in Russia, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia, and loads into cartridges available through any sporting goods retailer that carries imported ammunition. The Spencer repeating carbine survives in museum collections and antique arms auctions. Reproduction versions were manufactured for long-range target competition in the 1990s. The Sharps rifle has been in continuous reproduction since the 1970s. Companies in the American West build single-shot Sharps models for long-range hunting and competition today. The Maynard carbine, the Ballard, the Colt shoulder stock revolver, all legal to own as collectible antique firearms in most states. Every rifle on this list was manufactured before 1899, which means they qualify under the federal antique firearms exemption. No modern firearms license required, available through antique dealer networks. The knowledge itself cannot be taken away. You can trace Bourdon's complete patent history through the Ufusto archives. His conversion patent and primer patent are still on file. You can read the original Lieber Code in full at the Library of Congress. Article 70 is still there, unchanged, 160 years later. The Civil War collector community has been quietly reconstructing the history that the procurement records tried to erase. Through pension files, estate inventories, and the personal letters of men who never expected anyone to read them. The 25 weapons on this list existed. The inventors who built them were real. And knowing about them puts you in a very small group of Americans who understand what the official history of the Civil War deliberately left out. If you stayed through a 28-minute video about the hidden weapons of Union Army sharpshooters, weapons that a procurement bureaucracy spent 30 years erasing from the record, I don't need to tell you what that says about you. You're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. The ones who want the story behind the story. The ones who noticed that Hiram Burden's name appears on ammunition used in Russia today and asked why most Americans have never heard of him. The ones who understand that the official record is a document with an agenda, and that the real history lives in the pension files, the patent archives, and the personal effects of men who died without obituaries. There is more where this came from. The Civil War produced dozens of weapons, techniques, and inventions that followed the same pattern. Developed, used in the field, and then quietly buried in the same 15-year window by the same procurement machine. If you want to be in the room when we go through the next set, you already know what to do. Next video, 25 hidden homestead tools that the post-war farming industry buried using exactly the same playbook in the same window, 1865 to 1880.